welcome to the kitchen. Today I'm making apple pie, something I do frequently because it's delicious and I love it. This may not be the most accurate instructional video for you. Because I make apple pie so often, I just do it. I don't know how many apples I use or exact weights and measures and sizes. We will find out as we go through this video so that I can pass on some more accurate information, but hopefully you'll still be able to glean a few useful tips along the way. So let's see how we all get on. Now, normally at home when I'm making apple pie, I use a jar of my homemade apple pie filling. And I don't expect you to have apple pie filling at the ready. So I will show you how I get to this stage from basic apples. I make my apple pie, it's a shallow apple pie. Oh, got two of them here, careful don't drop one. I actually make it on a plate. Now this is an oven-proof Pyrex plate. So you need your standard everyday dinner plate will not do. If you put that in a hot oven, it's going to crack. Not only will you lose your plate, you'll have mushy apple pie dribbling all over your oven and a horrible mess to clean up. So do make sure whatever you do use, it's oven proof. I know my mum for years has made the same style of pie on a metal plate. I've got my tape measure somewhere. I've actually got a 9.5 inch pie plate. Poof. So that'll give us some measurements to put in the description. Whatever we find out from the recipe, I will put in the description below. So hopefully there'll be a more accurate reference for you all when we're done. Right, I've done my drawer for a potato peeler, but it'll peel anything. Turnips, carrots, and most importantly, apples. I have a selection of apples going on in my bowl. So I'm going to use this great big cooking apple. It's huge. And these are just standard fruit eating apples. Okay, I've got 1 kilo of apple, peel and core on. So 1 kilo of apples, or £2 5 ounces of raw apple. I've already prepared this saucepan. That's the pan I'm going to cook my apples in. At the moment I've got some water in it. I've also added a teaspoonful of salt to this water. I'm not going to cook the apples in the salty water, we will drain that off in a moment. But while we're peeling and coring and chopping our apples, if we place them into this salty water, that'll stop them going brown. They'll stay nice and white and lovely looking for us. So put that over there out the way a moment. Let's start with this great big cooking apple. Yay! So, peel and core and slice your apples. Step 1. Now don't let your apple peelings go to waste. Gather them all up and put them in your compost bin. Feed those worms so they can feed your garden next year. Right, apple number 2. Now, you don't need to see me peeling and chopping up some apples, so I'll be back with you when this is all chopped and sliced. Just pop back with you a second. I've not quite finished peeling and chopping, but as you're peeling and chopping your apples and putting them into your pan of salty water, every now and then just give them a squash about, make sure all of the surface of those apples is covered with that salty water. Doesn't need to overflow, it just means they've all had a dip at some point and got coated in the saltiness to keep them nice and white and crisp. Here we go. So all peeled and chopped and sliced, and every apple I do, I give the water a quick squish just to make sure everything's getting wet. Don't waste all your peels and choppings, put them in your compost. Now with these apples, I'm going over to the sink and I'm just going to use my hand to hold them in and drain off all that salty water. I'm not going to rinse them and wash them through. I'm literally just going to pour away the salt water that they're soaking in. So with a pan of wet, slightly salted trace of salt from the salty water they were sitting in. Apples, I'm going to put these on the stove top. Wooden spoon. Poof. Can I move you round to see? Possibly. We'll see what we can do. Hey! Hello! You're on the other side of the kitchen. You're not quite as far away as usual. You're rather close. Right, so our saucepan of apples. And this has now been on for a minute. This is hot. What I like to do to start with is actually put the lid on this pan. And that should create some steam that'll help cook these apples down without them burning and sticking. May need to add a splash of water. We'll watch it and see how we're doing. Yes, we definitely need a little splash of water in the bottom of this pan. I can smell the appliness. Literally, that should be a dribble. Again, I didn't measure it, I just splash it in. So a splash. If you have too much liquid, you can just cook it for a bit longer. Leave the lid off and let that excess water evaporate off. If your mixture's too wet and sloppy when it's cooked, we can reduce it down a little to give you a nice thick pie filling. So how are we doing? Good, right, we'll pause you. We'll come back when this is looking mushy. Now it's been about 10 minutes already and these are bubbling quite well. I'm on a mid-heat. I'm going to turn my heat down a little bit. Now these are just starting to soften and it's because of that splash of water. I'm a little bit wetter. Don't know how much you can see. No, you can't. Yeah, a bit too much liquid in my pan. So I'm going to leave the lid off and keep watching it and stirring it to allow that excess water to evaporate off. And my apples are going to carry on cooking. Shouldn't be much longer now, but I don't know. We'll find out. We're 1/4 past, so let's see how much longer it takes. So 10 minutes with the lid on, steamy. I did open it 2 or 3 times, give it a little stir and put the lid back just to make sure nothing's burning. Hello, so here we are 5 minutes later, whilst keeping an eye on that apple saucy mix. Now about half our apples have turned into, can I separate it? Oh, splash. Be careful splashes because this is boiling hot. I've turned into a liquid runny apple saucy mix and the other half of our apples are still quite lumpy and chunky and apple wise. It's just our bigger slices haven't fallen apart yet and the little ones have. So at this stage I've brought back that bowl we were weighing apples in and I'm going to pour my mixture out of a pan into a bowl, another container, something to cool. You don't want to leave them sitting in your saucepan to cool off. The saucepan's hot and they're going to carry on cooking, they're going to burn, stick to the bottom. So you want to get them out of there and leave them to cool in another container. So there's all our appley mix and I'm going to put some water in this saucepan just so it'll be nice and easy to wash in a moment when we're ready. So now this is all hot and in its bowl, cooling off, you can go and have a cup of coffee, eat your breakfast, make some lunch, do something else till this has gone cold. Hello, another quick weights and measures experiment. Oh, where's it gone? There. My hot apple's still cooling off actually. Just a thought while we're finding out what do I actually do, because I don't know, I just do it. I'm assuming my glass bowls weigh pretty nearly the same. So let's put 0 on the scales and see how much mix we've actually got. So we went from our kilo of raw unpeeled chopped apple to, wow, 600 grams. We're down to 600 grams of apple pie filling. So I'm not going to have very much left over. don't know about apple pie, I think I should be making tomato soup. The garden is still growing and harvesting wonderfully. I made 4 jars of tomato soup the other day. Not only do I have this tray full of tomatoes, oh my goodness, I've got this trunk full as well. It's wonderful growing your own food. I love it. Whilst our apples are cooling in their bowl, I'm going to make a start on the pastry. My first tip for our apple pie was to cook your apple pie filling in advance of making your pie. My second is to use self-raising flour for your pastry. A typical short crust pastry uses plain flour. I have found from years of playing around that self-raising flour gives me much better results. It's light and fluffy and melt in the mouth and wonderful. So my second tip, use self-raising flour. If you can't get hold of self-raising flour or there's none in the cupboard today, put a teaspoon of baking powder into your plain flour to give you that light fluffy finish. I have 8 ounces of self-raising flour here in my bowl, to which I am going to add 4 ounces of margarine. I'm cutting it into little cubes just to make the rubbing in process a little bit quicker and less squishy in the hands. Another good tip with pastry is to try and keep everything as cold as you can. So if you can have nice cold hands whilst you're doing this, all the better. Maybe give them a wash under a freezing cold tap for a minute before you start. It just all helps. Now that can go out, I don't need that bit. And we're just rubbing this in with our fingers by picking up a handful or finger dibbles, light and fingery. Just picking up a lump of the margarine and squishing it between our fingers, pushing in that flour with your thumbs as you work. So light, fluffy, delicate finger movements. Though we're pushing and squishing, we're not beating it around like making bread. We want to be light and fluffy and airy. If we pick it up, and as you see, I'm letting it sprinkle back down through my fingers as I'm rubbing in the fat to get some air into this pastry mixture. Give us a lovely light fluffy crust to our apple pies. Melt in the mouth and delicious. So we're just rubbing that in till the lumps of fat disappear and we have a slightly breadcrumby textured mixture. This is looking good, a nice light fluffy crumbly mixture. Perfect. So let's make that into pastry. I'm going to make a little well, just make a little divot in the bottom of our bowl, and I'm going to slowly add some milk to combine our pastry into a lump of dough. Now I'm going to add the milk very slowly. It's very easy to suddenly end up with a sticky globby mess, and we want a relatively dry, firm lump of dough. A standard table knife to help mix, and just very slowly. I don't know how much milk, just enough to combine it. Little dribbles, teaspoon or 2 at a time, what have I got there? Maybe a tablespoon to start with, and stirring it around just in the middle. And when that's all bound in, I'll add another tablespoonful, so 2. My guesstimate of 2 tablespoons of milk. I should be measuring it, shouldn't I, for our recipe. It can vary, depends on your flour, your air temperature, all sorts of things can change how much milk, how well you rubbed your fat into your flours and combined them. Ooh, flicking crumbs everywhere. A bit more. So I'd say 3 to 4 tablespoons gone in there at the moment. Now things are starting to draw together. I've still got a little bit of crumb on the edges. This middle bit's a little bit of crumb on the worktop as well. This middle bit's nice and sticky-ish, so I'm going to stop adding milk at this point and move it out the way. And just with gentle light touches like you were doing when we were making the crummy mix, just draw it all together by rolling it around the bowl and picking up those extra crumbs that haven't absorbed in yet. Scrape my fingers around the edges to break off all the crumbs. Clanky, noisy bowl. I'm just rolling it around till it's all combined as one piece, one mass lump. There we go, one not sticky hand lump of dough. Now if you've got seriously sticky, sprinkle some flour on it and try and draw it all together. If you have to add an awful lot of flour, I don't know what your pastry is going to be like. If it's not coming together, I would lift out the bit that is, lift out your fixed lump, and you've still got crumbs in the bowl, and then add a little extra milk to those crumbs and do the combining bit again till you have 2 pieces of dough, and then join the dough together. There, lump of pastry. Now I'm going to cut our piece of pastry in half because I want half for the top of our pie and half for the bottom. So I'm going to put our top to one side. I want a bit of flour now. So a sprinkling of flour onto your wet surface. And while you weren't looking, I sneaked off and put some grease on my plates. So I've greased my plate. So if you haven't done that yet, brush off, wash your floury hands and grease that plate. So I've cut my pastry into 2 pieces. Dusted flour on the board. I'm actually going to put a bit of flour on that. That's going to be our lid, but put a bit of flour on the bottom just so it doesn't stick while it's sitting there. And I'm also going to need, before I get too dusty, my rolling pin. Right, so we want to make a circular piece of pastry to go on our circular plate. So round it with your hands and gently squash. Make sure we're still floury, not sticking to the board. Round it gently and squash a bit more. Bring in the sides, and I'm going to pat around the edges. So before we even go anywhere near the rolling pin, I've got a disc of pastry. Then I've turned it over now, so we've got what was the dry side. The top is now on the bottom to keep everything nice and dusty. And then roll it out. So we roll one way, turn it, roll the other way, turn it, roll and turn. One, that's making sure we're not sticking to the surface underneath, and it's keeping that round shape that we want. So we won't have too much pastry cut off at the end that seems to be going to waste. I need to get another camera so you can see over the top and see what's going on the work surface. Now, I'm going to roll this out till I've got just enough to cover my plate. Doesn't matter which way your plate is, this way or that way. I've got a glass plate, makes things a bit easy, but even with a solid metal plate, you can still see that you have a little bit of pastry sticking out all the way around your plate. Now, because my plate's got a slight hollow in it, I want just a little extra pastry to fill that hollow. So just one more roll for me should be enough. So lifting up your dough, your pastry circle, and we're going to slide that out, covering our plate. Now, because of that little dent in the middle, I'm going to gently lift the sides and pat it down with my fingers to make sure I have no air bubbles sitting underneath the shape of my plate. This pastry is flush to the entire surface, no bubbles. And then, even at this point, I'm going to take my knife, table knife that we use to mix the pastry is fine, and I'm going to trim off the excess pastry around our plate. So that's by slicing our knife up and down on the edge of the plate. I'm not pushing it round. You will pull your pastry if you do that and ruffle it all up and spoil it. You need these up and down movements on the side of the plate, and as you're going up and down, you're slowly moving forward, slicing off that pastry as you go. And kind of sawing motion, I suppose. Just let the excess drop down onto the work surface. It's absolutely fine. We'll gather it up in a moment. There. One perfectly pastried pie plate, and because it was greased, this is all sticking nicely. That's ready for our filling. If your filling has gone cold, you don't want to be putting hot filling into this pastry base. It'll go all melty and squishy and horrible. So let's see how cold our filling is. Not cold enough. I'm still quite warm, so this is going to have to wait, and we'll be back with you, possibly in an hour. So my pie filling has cooled off nicely now and is looking lovely and ready. Cool, thick, lovely apple pie filling. Lumpy bits, juicy bits, gorgeous. So while that's ready, we'll prepare our top, a lid for our pie, a piece of our dough left, and we've also got the bit that was our scraps of pastry that we trimmed off around the edge. I'm not going to combine this into our second half of dough. I want to keep our apple pies light and melt in the mouth and fluffy and gorgeous, and the more you work and mould and use pastry, the harder and crispier and tougher it gets. So I'm going to keep that, and we'll use it in a minute, but not just yet. So our second half lump of dough, refloured our surface, and exactly the same as we did with our bottoms. Squish it round to a circle, pat it on the top, squish it round a circle, pat it on the top. Well, I'm not patting it, I'm pressing it down and circling it and pressing it just to give us a start, and then I'll press all the way around the edges to flatten it out a bit more. So I'm starting with quite a big hand-sized circle of thick dough. For this topping, it's not necessary to have it round, she says, thinking on the go, thinking on the fly. We can make it square. In fact, square would probably be better. So I'm going to do that now, create a rectangle. We want to develop the same sort of thickness in our pastry that we had with the base. So I've just rolled it out into a vaguely rectangular shaped piece of pastry. What we do need is that rectangle or square, if that's what you end up with, needs to be wide enough that when you put your pie plate on it, the pastry pops out of each side. I'm going to put my milk around the edge of our pie plate. Where's my cup gone? There it is. And just using my fingers, make the edge of the crust wet all the way around. I've milked the edge of our pie so our pastry topping will stick. I'm then going to fill it up with our apple pie filling. Can you see it? No, you can't. Just bring it over here. This might, I don't know if it'll all fit. It will. Yay! It's all gonna fit in there. Delicious. So 1 kilo of apples. Makes a very bulgy apple pie. I think we might have a bit much. I'm going to have to take some out. It'll spill all over the oven. Too high and bulgy. When it starts to cook, it's all going to dribble everywhere. I'm going to change my mind and I will take some out. Just to level it off a bit. That looks a little more promising. Yes. Not much left over, a tiny scoop, and I have those sticky fingers. So lift our filled pie off of there. So with a knife, I'm just going to use my table knife again. I'm going to cut my pastry. Again, don't drag too much, you'll just ruffle it all up. So I'm doing slow little sawing kind of movements. I'm going to cut strips of pastry out. So I'd start with a short strip actually. Taking a strip of your pastry, you now can't see me again. Decided you couldn't see, so I've moved you around. So with all our strips of pastry, I'm going to make a lattice on this pie. We'll start at an edge, go across the top, and then the second strip we do, we go in the opposite direction, and we carry on across and up and down. And then across, that's a fat one, and up and down, and across. I'm not weaving them in and out of each other. I'm going to put the floury side on the inside, there we go. They're just creating a bit of a zigzag as we work our way down and across the pie. And there we go. So it looks like it's all woven in and out. Oh, that one broke on me. Let me see. Will I use it? Yes, I will. Stick that on there. Is anyone going to notice? Squidge it together on my fingers. When it's baked, you won't see. Lovely. I think I need one more strip to go across here. Got a little scrap of pastry left. I'll roll that out. Add a little short piece, go across there. Just push around your edges, make sure they're sticking onto that milky edge we made. And then just like we cut our base before we put the apple in, I'm going to trim round the sides with the knife. Oh, I don't know if this makes it any better to see, not really, no. Trim all these little dangly scrappy bits off. There we are, back in shot. Once we've trimmed off the edges, made it all nice and neat, I'm going to use a standard dinner fork and I'm going to press into the pastry all the way around the edges, making a fancy little fluted edge. I'm going to dip my fork in the flour, just to flour it slightly, because it gets sticky on these patches that don't have any pastry on the top. The milk's wet, so the fork gets damp. And then it gets sticky. This sticks our lattice bits down nice and firmly and gives us a pretty edge to our pie. And one last overlapping bit. Now, not quite finished yet. The milk, I poured milk into a little cup. So I'm just going to dibble some fingers into this, and I'm going to, you could use a pastry brush, but my hands are floury and sticky and messy anyway. So I'm just as happy to do this with my fingers. I'm just splashing milk all over the pie. All this pastry slightly damp with our milk. I'm gently tapping around our fork pressy bit. Tap, tap, tap. So my hands are all wet and sticky with milk. And just tap, 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 all gently all over the surface of our pie. I'm going to rinse off my wet, sticky fingers. And my last step is to take a dessert spoon, a level dessert spoon of caster sugar, and I'm going to gently sprinkle that all over that milky surface of pie. This will give us a nice crispy, crunchy, golden topping. Remember, there's no sugar added to the apple. There's no sugar in the pastry. So although this seems like a lot of sugar, It's a great big pie, and it is the only sugar we have added. There, so now we're ready for the oven. I've set my oven to 200 degrees centigrade. I think, if I remember rightly, at 355 Fahrenheit. I expect it to take about 45 minutes, but we'll check it and we'll see. So there we go, one pie ready for the oven. There we go, pie in the oven, cooking nicely. Now, not to waste those scraps of pastry we have left, so we've got the original lump that we trimmed off the base and all our little pieces from our lattice around the top. I'm going to squish them all together into one lump, and I've prepared myself a baking sheet with some greaseproof, just lined with some greaseproof paper. And I'm going to make what I would call sugar biscuits. So it's just our leftover pastry. There's a sizable lump, and I'm not doing anything fancy with these, though you could cut them into pretty little circles if you want. So roll out our pastry. A little bit thicker than we wanted it for our pie crust. So we roll out our piece of pastry. Now I've got a very rough edged shape, a bit of thing. Now you could cut this out with cookie cutters if you want, but I generally just don't bother. I'm going to use the milk we were using for the top of our pie and splatter some on top and rub it all over so everything's wet. Again, rinse off my sticky fingers. And then some more caster sugar, just like we did with our pie, and sprinkle that over, covering as much of the surface of this pastry as we can. Sprinkle, sprinkle, but not heavily, it's just enough that there's a light dusting all over the place. I've probably used half a dessert spoon, half a level dessert spoon. Now with this circle of pastry, I'm just going to, I don't know, quarters, slightly more. I'm going to cut it into 6 pieces. So just slice it into chunks. So very irregular. I've got little triangle-y bits off the edge. Oops, stuck together, and slightly more squarey bits from the middle. Lay them out on my greased baking sheet and pop them in the oven till they're golden brown and crunchy and lovely. We'll have some extra little cookies to munch along with our apple pie. So in the oven they go. They won't take as long as the pie, maybe 15 minutes or so. So we'll see you when everything's cooked and ready. So here we are, hot apple pie, fresh out of the oven. It did take 45 minutes as I had suspected. Looking gorgeous and smelling wonderful. Oh, they're quite warm as well. The biscuits aren't quite so hot, they cooked a lot quicker. So a few little extra pastry sugar biscuits. And a little pot of spare apple. It was just a bit too much for the pie. Grandson's with me tomorrow, so this will be absolutely perfect to go after his lunch, maybe with a touch of yoghurt. So that's it for today. Wonderful home-baked apple pie. So we'll see you next time here in the kitchen. Bye for now. Have fun.